All right, so let's create a trivial React application. So you should already have installed Node.js, right? Node.js is available from nodejs.org, or you can install it using Brew. But if you go to nodejs.org, you can download the latest version of Node.js, install it in your local machine. And once you have it installed, it'll be available. There'll be two executables available to you when you install Node.js, right? Two of them. One of them is npm, Node Package Manager, and then Node itself, okay? Plus a couple other things, but those in particular are going to be the ones that are of most interest, right? So Node, as we'll see in a bit, it's nothing more than a JavaScript interpreter, right? It's a runtime that allows you to interpret JavaScript files and execute them locally on your machine. All right? Very much like Java is an interpreter for compile Java classes. You say Java and then the name of the Java class. Here you say Node and you give it a JavaScript file and it executes that JavaScript file. So that's Node. npm stands for Node Package Manager. It's very similar to Maven. Right? It's a package manager that allows you to automatically download and install libraries on your machine and put them in a repository locally on your machine. Same thing with npm. npm allows you to download from a code repository executable that can be executed by your Node install Node instance on your machine. All right? So you can install all sorts of tools and all sorts of libraries, all sorts of things in your local machine by saying npm install -g for global. Meaning you want this library to be globally available in your namespace. In this particular case, we're installing a library that is provided by Facebook to create boilerplate React application. So once you've installed it, it'll go through a couple of cycles, install it locally, and then you can just type at the command line, create React app, and then the name of your application. Right? When you create it, it'll go off to a website. It'll download even more libraries, right? And locally it'll create a directory with the same exact name, my app. Okay. Once you have it, you can then go into that directory and start it by typing npm again, npm start. This is very similar to if you're in a Java application, it's like saying maven clean install, right? And then you can run it. Maven clean install over here, and then running it from the command line. All right. So let's do that. Let's go to the command line. I already had something up and running. So let's see. So let's go to webdev and go to 2018. And let's go to fall. Okay. And I'm going to create a brand new application. So I'm going to call it create React app. So create React app, and I'll call whiteboard. So you'll do something similar, right? And so hopefully you'll choose a unique name, such as whiteboard dash fall 2018 dash first name dash last name, okay? And then you'll host this on Heroku, again with the same similar naming convention, right? So that when you submit the URL, the TAs will know who you are, will be able to identify you, right? So this is downloading all the libraries that it needs, including Babel. If you see it real quick, went by real quick. Meanwhile, it's gonna create several files for us. We're gonna blow away most of those files. We're not gonna use most of them. Just to point out the fact that we're gonna start from scratch, right? Most of everything I demo, ideally I like to start from scratch, not assuming anything, or at least the minimum as possible. So we'll create our very first React Hello World application. Are we done? OK, it's done. So let's go into whiteboard, and we can do an npm start. So what this will do is that it'll start a Node.js server, right, that is hosting the boilerplate application that was created for you, right? It's kind of like their hello world, although I think it's too sophisticated for me just yet, even still. Nevertheless, it's fairly simple. Let's open it up to see what it created for us. Close project. So it's open. And so webdev 2018 fall. There it is. All right. So there's a whiteboard. So notice that looks like it's a Git repository already. Already added a couple of good Git ignore things in here. Probably we might want to add this .idea additionally here, because this is part of this IDE. So we can add perhaps .idea so that it ignores this folder as well. That's specific to your IDE. You don't want to put in your repository anything that has to do with your IDE. What else is in here? Package JSON. Package JSON, as we'll talk about a little later, it's a Node.js's version of POM, of a POM file, of a description of this project, right? Describing what the name of the project is, who the author is, maybe contact information, any dependencies that this project has with other projects. So that's what package JSON is. Probably describing that it depends on other libraries such as React. So that means that React needs to be installed. React DOM in a minute we'll see what it is. But these are the libraries that it depends on, and a couple of scripts to run and execute or build or test our application. A couple other things here. You'll notice there's a public directory in here. The public directory has the index file. This is the index file that gets hosted, right? When the server, when you go to the root directory, the root context of your application, that is the index file, right? And that index file has a lot of magical things occur here. But one of the more interesting things that happens here is that this index file is completely empty, right? This index is completely empty. You'll notice that the only thing that really matters here is that there is this one div in there, okay? And that div has a specific ID associated there, right? It says root, okay? So what's going to happen here is that this index file is going to be served up by the server, and additional libraries, additional JavaScript are going to try and grab that ID. Right, going to try and grab that div, just like jQuery, right? You would say, jQuery quotation hash root. That's how you would grab that, right? And then you could then inject anything you want in there, all right? So that's what React is going to do. It's going to grab that root element, right? It's going to dynamically inject content into that div, all right? We're never going to ever touch this index page. We're going to leave it alone. Instead, we're going to be working at a higher level. We're going to be doing all our work in SRC, right? Source. All our work is going to be under source. Inside source, all our files, right, are going to be plain old HTML, plain old JavaScript, okay? But these are going to be at a version of JavaScript, ES6, that is not yet fully supported by all browsers equally, okay? So what is going to happen is that React, every time you make a change to your file, is going to take your JavaScript file and is going to transpile it into a lower level version of JavaScript, right? A more pedestrian version of JavaScript that all browsers are guaranteed, or most browsers are guaranteed to understand, right? So when it serves up, it'll serve up a different version of our file. So anyway, this content that you see here is mostly generated by this index file here, this index here. And the content is inside of app and whatnot. I'm not going to get into it. Actually, we're going to blow away all this content, and we're going to start from scratch. Right? We're going to create our own index file from scratch. So let's do that. Let's blow away all our content. And obviously we broke our application, right? There's nothing in it. Notice that it tried to compile index.js. It didn't find it. It's complaining. So it has a fairly good communication between the browser, between the Node.js server that is connected to it. So there's a nice development environment here, right? That compiles, redeploys, and refreshes the browser, right? Without me having to do anything, right? So it's we have when you start the application, it also starts a file or directory listener. It listens, it watches that particular directory for any changes in that directory, right? If anything changes, new files, all the file changes, it recompiles everything necessarily and then redeploys everything, packages and redeploys everything. So let's create our index file. At least we need to have our index file. So index.js. All right, this is our index.js. There's nothing interesting in it yet. It found index, and it sees, well, there's nothing in it. There's nothing for me to render. So here, what we'll need is a couple of things. We'll need to import a couple of libraries. In particular, we'll always need to import this one library at least, right? The React library, right? From React. Okay. Notice already we are looking at syntax that we're not familiar with, right? But this is proper JavaScript, right? This is plain old JavaScript. It just happens to be a newer version of JavaScript, right? It's ES6, which fixes a lot of the things that were missing in what we played around with just last week, right? For instance, last week we were assuming that there were no modules, right? There was no naming, there was no namespaces and whatnot. And well, that has been fixed in newer versions of JavaScript, but it's not yet fully supported across all browsers. All right, so we still have to if we're working and coding in low-level JavaScript, we still have to resort to things such as iffy statements and things like that because packages and namespaces are not yet fully supported. Right, but in newer versions of JavaScript, it is supported. Right, so this new syntax of being able to import and export things from packages, that's very modern, right? Like any modern programming language. So we have React. So React has all the core concepts are all included in React. But then React, what it did is it wanted to be able to support any number of frameworks, right? Being able to render in the browser, be able to render on mobile applications, right? So they split that part that was specific to rendering on any particular framework, they split that into separate libraries, right? So they kept the core in React, but then split off what was for rendering HTML or rendering on mobile applications, right? So if we're going to be rendering on a browser, well, we have HTML to deal with, right? We have all the tags and attributes and whatnot specific to HTML, specific to the DOM, right? So we need to import that as well. We need to import the React DOM from React DOM. Okay. All right. Notice that yet there's nothing still loaded into our application here. Let me bring that over here. Still empty. So we have at least the minimum libraries that we need. There it is, right? So again, different frameworks will render differently, right? If it's DOM, then that means that I'm going to render my content in some HTML elements, right? So you need to tell me what element am I rendering in. So that's exactly what React DOM does, right? So React DOM has a function called render that takes two arguments. One of the arguments is what is it that you want to render, and the next argument is where do you want to render it, right? The where we already know, right? The where is that div with the ID of root. That's where we want to render it. What we want to render it could be just a hello world, right? In this particular case, and so we could just have here h1 hello world, right? So that's the content we want to render, and then where do we want to render is the second argument. This is straight JavaScript, just grabbing the document, grabbing an element, and the element is a DOM element. In this case, is the element whose ID is root. Right? And we're passing a reference to that element. And here's our hello world. Right? What it has done is it has compiled that, has generated JavaScript that grabs that ID and then injects that H1 in there. Right? One of the things that we might want to point out here is that this weird syntax of having HTML, right, embedded instead of JavaScript. Typically we would, if you're using jQuery, we would, have a jQuery function. We would put this in quotes and parentheses and whatnot, right? All that has been abstracted away, right? That's such a common step, right? This is what frameworks do. Frameworks, what you try to do is eliminate the repetition, right? Because as good developers, we are lazy developers, right? We don't want to do things more than once manually, and we want to automate ourselves away into out of a job eventually, replace ourselves. So you have a hello world. Everybody okay? All right, awesome. So we have the simplest of HTML of React applications. So let's push this to Heroku. Make sure that this deploys on Heroku. We'll I'll start in a tab right next to it. So it's still running. It's just I'm in a different tab. We can say git status. Looks like this is not a repository as I thought it was. So let's initialize it. We'll say git init. Let's add all the content. So let's first check to see what's going to be added. All right. So yeah, we definitely want that. We want the public source git ignore. Excellent. So let's add everything. And let's commit, and this will be our first commit. So once it has been committed, we can now use the Heroku client, right? CLI, the command line interface, to create a brand new application. So if you say Heroku create, it's going to parse the folder, and it's going to try and guess what type of application this is, right? It found a package JSON. If it's a package JSON, it immediately assumes that this is a Node.js application. It must be a Node.js application, right? If it would have found a pom.xml, it would have said, this is a Java application, right? And depending on the dependencies, it would have created the correct type of application. So this one created a Node.js application, and what we can do is push. It also created a remote, git remote. Notice it created a remote called Heroku that it points to a Heroku Git repository. See that? Right, this is a repository created. It says all the code that I'm going to deploy is all the code that lives in that repository. That repository doesn't exist yet. Right? There's nothing in it. I haven't pushed anything. Right? It's empty. So the application is still not done anything. So we need to push to that repository. When it gets pushed, what Heroku is going to do when it gets a hold of it, it's going to do an npm install. That's what Heroku is going to look at. Every time we push something to that repository, Node is going to say, well, I need to build this, I need to deploy this, and I get to restart the server. Right? The first thing it'll do is it'll do an npm install, and then it'll do an npm start. Right? We're doing it here manually. Right? We did the npm install, we did the npm start, but that's what it would typically do. So let's push. Let's push this. So we can say npm git push Heroku master. Master is the branch we're currently in, right? The Git repository. Indeed. Let me see. Git branch. Yeah, we are in the master branch. So we're going to push all the code that is currently in the master branch. We're going to push it to git push Heroku master. So it's going to copy all the content, and it says it detected it was Node.js. It creates a runtime environment. It looks at the package JSON. It's going to compile the package JSON with a npm install, and then it's going to do an npm start. So this is going to start remotely in the running on Heroku. So while that's going, let's take a look at this. To run it, you can say Heroku open. Heroku open will see what the application you just created, and it'll kick off a browser pointing to the correct URL. It's almost done. Node modules. So node modules is where all the libraries are copied onto when you implement. Notice that the build was successful. The launch is going to do an npm start, and it deployed it to this URL. Still Erie 18 something or other. We can change the name of the application, obviously, but that's the default name. It comes up with some random name for your application, but you can rename that. All right, so we can open it by saying Heroku open. So now we have both applications running locally and remotely. Right, so locally we have hello world, and remotely we have hello world. All right, so we have a working React application running locally and remotely. So typically what you would do is throughout the day, as you're working on your assignment, you will be working locally, committing several times a day. Right, multiple times, very verbose, and then at the end of the day, you do a git push Heroku master, right, and then it gets pushed to remotely to a server. Make sense? All right. All right. Excellent. All right. So a couple of things about the components, right? So we're going to be creating a whole bunch of components. So the idea in React is that we want to break our large applications into a family of components, right? Where we have higher level components containing lower level components, recursively until you have, whatever as much granular you want to be. Right? Obviously, there's some it becomes after a while, becoming more and more granular doesn't give you any return on your investment. So let's create our very first component. So the idea of components is to create levels of abstraction, right? Where you would recursively create different levels of abstraction, right? Up until you hit something that actually can be rendered. Right? So let's create our very first component. Right? And typically we would put all components under a directory components. So components. So let's create our very first component. We'll say new, and this will be hello world component. These components are all going to be just JavaScript. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, they all are just plain old JavaScript 6. So I would say, let's see, import React. They all import the same library, React, from React. In this case, we're not going to need React DOM, right? Because we're not going to be manipulating the DOM anymore, right? We only have to manipulate it once at the top level. That's going to grab the top level component and add it to the index, right, to the root. But then all the children, right, are just going to be recursively added to the parent, and then the parent is what gets added to the root. All right, so let's create our very first component. We'll need another thing here. We'll have also to include a component. And we're going to create a brand new class. So it'll be called Hello World. There it is. And we're going to extend the component. This is more and more looking like a real object-oriented programming language, right? With extending and interfaces and injection and everything you would expect in a full-blown programming language. A couple other things here with constructors, right? And super, calling your super class and things like that. So the component is a class that is embedded inside of the React library, right? The React library is at the root, whereas component is embedded in a larger object. And the curly brackets there means from the React library, extract that particular sub-object in there, right? So that's a piece of syntax that we're going to be using quite a lot, right? Where we're going to be it's an operator that says, well, here's a big object, and that object has several attributes, right? And each one of those attributes might be an object unto themselves, recursively, right? As complex as you want. So this operator, the curly bracket operator, says, extract the attribute in that object that has this particular name, right? That attribute called component, right? So we'll be using it quite a lot. The component has itself a constructor, and one of the things that constructor expects is a property, a set of properties. So props, as listed here, is the mechanism by which a component can talk to the rest of the world, right? Typically, the way when you have an HTML tag, right? Typically, the way you configure that HTML tag is through attributes, right? You can pass in an attribute and you give it a value of an attribute. Yes. Well, here in React jargon, those attributes we're going to call them properties, right? Those attributes that you configure on an HTML element, all those attributes are passed on to the component as a property, right, as our list of properties. So here's everything we would need to configure ourselves, right? That is passed on to us. Right now we don't have anything configured. Right. So here what we want to do is render. We want to render. So the component implements a function called render, right? That tells the world, how do I want to display? What do I want to display as myself? Right? And right now, the way we this is an algorithm that we can calculate, right? Just like in Java, you would, in a servlet or a JSP, you would iterate over something and calculate what the HTML looks like. Same thing here. In this curly bracket, I could have all sorts of for loops and maps and if statements and all sorts of very complex algorithm that calculates how I want to render. Right now, I don't want to render. I don't want to be very complex. Whatever this returns is what gets rendered. Right? So let's return something. We're going to return something, and here is where we're going to say what do we want to render as. So we're going to say I want to render as hello component. Okay? Again, the mix and match of HTML and JavaScript. Right? This is a brand new language. It's called JSX, okay? JavaScript extended, right? That allows you to embed HTML right inside of JavaScript. Right? Usually, we would say that you don't want to do that. Right? Typically, we teach but that was when you had to have concatenation, have strings all over the place, and pluses everywhere, right? And fill in elements, and that was just a mess, right? To try and generate one language from another language, right? Ideally, we would want to stick it to the original language, like maybe in Angular, you have a template, and all the logic is in that template, right? But over here, because we don't have the necessity of using quotation marks and plus signs and any of that, right? It flows naturally. It flows as if it were part of the language. It's actually nice. All right, so this is going to render as hello component. Well, let's go back to our index. And what we're going to do is that we're going to import it. We're going to say import. And it's what was it called? The component? Hello world. So we'll say hello world from, and it's in the component slash, and this is in hello world. There it is. So we've now loaded it, and now what we could do is replace this and say hello world, as if it were a brand new tag that we just created, right? And you can treat it like any other tag. Yes.
So in the hello world component,
yeah,
we are passing the props from parent to child member.
Yes, which right now we're not passing anything, but yes.
Right. So why are we sending it back to parent in super? Isn't that a cyclic?
No, the parent is component. Not this. This is not the parent.
We are passing it to super call again.
Yeah, because we're extending component. So component is the super.
Right. So we are calling super, so that calls parent classes method, right?
Yeah. So component wants to know what the properties are, right? And it's going to do a lot of things. For instance, it's going to put some listeners on it to see if anything changes, and then it's going to notify if these properties change. Also, a lot of magic is going to happen, which is all hidden through components.
So they'll be passed down from component to its child, right? So why is child calling it again?
So this is not, this right here has nothing to do with this over here, right? It's an inherited super is a meaning that I am inheriting from component, from this class, just plain old object orientation, right? I'm inheriting all the functions and attributes that are defined by component, including this constructor, and I'm calling components constructor, right? Which internally has an implementation which it's hidden from us, right? Which one of the things that it does is that it associates listeners, right? So that if any changes happen on those variables, it can notify other folks. But no, it doesn't have to do anything with this over here. Okay, it does mean that if I can pass here something like a message, right, Alice, right, I can pass something here, and now in props I have access to that message. Okay, and we'll see that in a minute, right? Okay, and the reason this works, that I can pass this in here, is because I am calling super props. Otherwise, it would not work, right? Because all that magic of connecting this to an object-oriented world, right, is implemented in component. Okay. All right, excellent. Let's see, where are we? Hello world, we did that. Component. All right, so we created a component and we rendered it.
Where's the transfer file created?
I'm sorry?
The .js file where it is created, doesn't mean when it is compiled.
The compiled? Well, no, it has the browser has it. The browser has it. Oops, what happened?
So the compilation is done on the browser, or where is it done?
No, the compilation happens here, and it gets deployed. It's bundled into one single JavaScript, usually called as a bundle.js, and it gets redeployed to the browser.
So it is not the bundle.js. It's not located on the. So where is that file located?
Not quite sure. Let me see. Probably. I don't know. Probably part of the public.
Because if, as in the reason we are compiling is that browser is not able to understand the JSX.
Well, let me see what's going on here. Export default. Oh, okay. I forgot something. Sorry. One of the things is to make this available from the outside world is that this needs to be exported. So this would be export and the default package, and then hello world. There we go. Hello component. Yes. So you actually can see what gets compiled if you take a look at the source. This is the bundle. That's the bundle that gets deployed, right? But it's only on the browser side. Yeah. So there's two compilations, right? There's two compilations. Babel can be configured to compile on the browser, right? Or can be configured to compile at the file system, right? My guess is that it's configured to do it on the bundle. When you're going to deploy this in production, right, then you would run npm build. npm build will generate a directory called dist distribution, and in that dist it'll include the index.js, index.html, and the bundle.js. And what it'll do is it will take all the JavaScript that you created, it'll put it in one single file. It will compress it, will uglify it, will whatever, right? And so it will be one single file. Yeah. But yes, yeah. And you can look at what actually gets built. If you notice the iffy pattern right here, okay, because again the regular browsers don't understand what import is or any of these packages thing, right? But internally they know that, oh, we implemented using these patterns, these design patterns. And if you want to spend some time playing around, take a look at the bundle. That's very geeky, but yeah, go ahead. That's pretty cool. All right, excellent. Let's take a quick break, and we'll come back right after this.